your reading, and I just wanted to say that the events in South Africa changed so many lives, mine included. I was 16, homeless, poor, panhandling for money outside a liquor store in Calgary, and there was a man out there, a man of color, an old man of color, handing out leaflets about trying to get Nelson Mandela freed from prison. I knew nothing about this. I knew nothing about apartheid, but he spent an hour filling me in on the history, and I felt my world just start to widen out to things I'd never heard about before. And I worked with him every Saturday for months handing out leaflets, and that was the start of my political self. So while you had experienced those things, for me it just was an eye-opening thing. And I wondered if anybody else had that kind of understanding, opening of understanding when you heard about apartheid and the events that we heard about today.
Well, one thing I learned at the LC is growing up, I'm 65, so I grew up with this idea that apartheid had been around a lot longer than just the 20th century. I hadn't realized it was actually, I thought it was part of this whole South African history from when the British got in there. So that's something new for me.
Apartheid really,
Use the mic.
apartheid was in operation since the 1800s, but it was illegal.
Okay.
And so in 1948 it became legal.
Oh,
Yes.
that was the difference. Okay.
Yeah, and it was funny when they tested everybody. They would put a pencil in your head, and if it fell out, you were either white or you were colored. If it stuck in your head, you were black. So they really divided a lot of families.
Oh, no doubt.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Go ahead.
My name is Melody, and I basically had this boyfriend when I was like a teenager, and when I went to his place for the first time, it was all Africa stuff, and he had lived in Zimbabwe for a while, and when I was ready to start traveling, I was like testing if God was real, so I actually flew to South Africa with no plan. I thought, well, surely, I'll get ripped to shreds, and everyone told me like, oh, you're going to get raped, you're going to get robbed, you're going to be a victim of violence, and I didn't really have a connection with the country before that. As my plane was coming down, it was landing in Durban, I could see the huts out my window of the Valley of 1,000 Hills.
Yes.
And on the airplane, and then I heard a voice that said, "You're home." And I looked to side, and there was nobody there, and I was bawling. And it was the best 2 months of my life, and I don't know why. I can't explain what that is. If it's because humans in general, came from Africa, or what. But it was the power of South Africa, the power of the contrast. Traveling, seeing abject poverty and all of the negative things, but then seeing the beauty and the modernity and so it's just the contrast of it, I've been 3 times, and the third time I went was a couple of years ago when I was trying to heal from a broken relationship, and I knew I had to go, just because I needed to feel the energy of South Africa under my feet. I needed to be rejuvenated because I felt like I was dying inside, and it's just like sitting. I just had to go back to South Africa, and it's not really a comment about apartheid, but just how powerful the country is. It's like a power center for me for some reason. So I was so excited. I'm like, oh, she's from South Africa, yay! Anyways, I really enjoyed hearing your
Story.
a part of your biography, and I do plan to purchase your book. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Yes, please.
So, part of my family was classified white. The other half we were classified colored. And whites and blacks and Indians, we couldn't really mix. There was no marriage allowed. And as the years went on and I grew up, I met a German man and my husband now, and we fell in love, and we couldn't get married in South Africa. And the police would hunt us on a daily basis. And so we finally had to leave South Africa, and I couldn't go back. My passport was confiscated, so I couldn't go back, and I didn't see my family for 13 years until Mandela came into power, and then my passport was reinstated. And after 13 years, I went back to see my family, and things were really changed then.
Jerena, I have a question for you. You were, I wondered what inspired you to write the Serena's Crown.
Oh, pass the microphone. Right. Can you reach? There we are.
Thank you. Is this one?
Yeah.
That's a really good question. We were traveling in Russia, and we were on a cruise, and we were through the Baltic, and we had 3 days in St. Petersburg, the last day of which we went to the Fabergé Museum. Now, up to that point, I had a character in my head, but he was unemployed. Didn't know what to do with him. We walked through the Fabergé Museum, and there was, of course, lots of eggs. But this one egg jumped out at me. It's called the rosebud egg. I should have brought it with me today.
Wow.
The lid pops off. First of all, it's red enamel and it's got gems all over the place. And the lid pops off. And inside is an enamel yellow rose. The Jerena loved yellow roses. They grew around her home when she was a girl. But they couldn't grow them in Russia. Even in the greenhouses, they wouldn't grow. So as a point of his love to his queen, this was the yellow rose. And if you open the yellow rose, inside is a gold chain with a ruby, cabochon ruby, with a diamond inset in it. And the other little thing was a miniature of her coronation crown. So this egg particularly was of love and devotion, and it was to honor her coronation day. So when I heard that story, I thought, okay, now I got a job. I got a character. I can write a book. And I did.
I just wondered if you found out anything more interesting about the Romanovs while you were writing and doing your research.
Pass that. They're an interesting group.
Yeah, this one was a good one. Gosh, now his father's name's gone right out of my head. Alexander III. The Tsar Nicholas's father was a military man, right down to his toes. And the one thing that he believed in is that his family should know what it was to be military. So one thing that he could impose on his family was their sleeping conditions. They all slept on cots. They were allowed one coarse blanket and no pillow. If they were ill, and they had to be really ill, they got a pillow. So he imposed that on his children, and Tsar Nicholas imposed it on his children, which are mostly daughters. And there's a story, Grand Duchess Maria had to have her tonsils removed. She was 16. If you know anything about the Romanovs, you know they're hemophiliacs, right? So the doctor starts the procedure, and she started bleeding so badly, she's choking on her blood. And he was going to run away and say, I can't do this, can't do this. And then Serena took one look at him and said, you're doing it. So he finished the surgery, and she survived that part of her life at any rate, but she got a pillow.
Wow. Wow. I appreciate my pillow more now.
I haven't forgotten about you, Ruth. I have a question, but I wanted to ask you, Winona, you look at all those books over there. We've got a spy novel, a cruise ship adventure, romantic time travel. Do you have plans for a new book?
I only brought my mysteries. I didn't bring those, but they are available on Amazon. Yes, I've got 4 mysteries in my Jason Davies series, and I'm working on the 5th one right now. I'm about 3/4 of the way through it. It'll be out in March. And then I'm going to bring him here. I'm going to bring Jason back to Vancouver. He started out in Vancouver in the novel Coldplay, working on a cruise ship, sailing from Vancouver to Alaska. And he was actually inspired by a musician that my husband and I met on a Holland America cruise to Alaska. Who's a Facebook friend of mine right now. So yeah, I'm going to bring him to New Westminster, I think, and give him an adventure here.
Awesome. Love it.
I should ask you, is there any further questions from the audience at all? Anybody? So Ruth, what I want to know about your writing is what made you interested in writing about Alexander?
That whole period, actually.
I was first interested in Alexander when I was 16 in a history class at school. I was obsessed with him. He has become my muse. By the time I was 17, I almost didn't graduate because I spent the whole year writing my first novel about Alexander. And then after that, eventually he just sort of possessed my life. I went to visit Greece first in 1979 and went back for several times, and then I went there to live for 5 years. And in the meantime, in '93, when I was living in Greece, I was going to write a young adult novel about Alexander's son. But I then thought, no, I should be writing one about Alexander. So in '93, I started this novel. Because I lived in Greece, I visited a lot of the sites that you'll find in the second volume of it. But of course, the first volume was all taking place around Babylon and places I've never been. So there was tons and tons of research. It took me, between the research and the writing, and I was working part-time at the time, it took me about 12 years to write the book. So when I sent it out, it took me 2 years to find a publisher, and it was a small publisher in England. I sent the thing to him on Friday, and on Monday morning he returned my call and said, send us the manuscript. And he read it, but it was very long, of course. My editor had already chopped about 500 pages, so it was very long, so he said, let's publish it in 2 volumes. Okay, the first volume, the one I read from today, Blood on the Moon, was published in 2015. And 2017, the other one, The Fields of Hades, which a lot of that book takes place in Greece, and that was published. And in the meantime, I had already visited all the places in Greece, and when the Egyptian tourism heard about my second book, they invited me to come on a trip to Egypt to see everything. So it has been a long journey with this, but because I write historical fiction and there's so much history to research and things like that, it takes quite a while to get it just right. So anyway, that's me and Alexander. He's on my finger and he's on my t-shirt.
Yeah, I love the t-shirt.
And in your heart.
T-shirt. Yes,
And in your heart too, right? Yay.
We still have a minute or 2 left, and I'd like, my question to all 4 of you is about research. I know it's a giant rabbit hole I often fall down while writing my own novels, so if you have something to share with us about research, I'd really appreciate it.
Google Street View.
Google Street View.
Yeah, I write about England a lot, and I've been there a lot, and I was there last year. But in order to, because my character moves around London a lot, I love Google Street View because I can see what a particular street looked like, not only now, but back in 2009. You know, it's amazing what you can do. The only thing that's missing is the sounds and the smells. I'm very smell oriented, but I rely on Google Street View.
Wow.
As this was my first novel, and it was the memoir, I knew my story off by heart, but I couldn't. I had to do a lot of research because when you write a memoir, it has to be the truth, and you have to look up, and there's a lot of citations in my book because you have to tell them where you got the information from, even though you lived through it. So I found that very interesting. Even the song that I put in my book, when I grew up, Elvis Presley songs, I had to tell them who wrote the song, what year it was published, and who produced it. So there's a lot of research. So so I have a sequence to my book coming up, and it's another nonfiction. So I'm going to have to do a lot of research again. And this time it's all about in Canada when I came to Canada. So thank you.
Well, when I first started writing this book, I didn't have a computer to do research on the computer. So I did a lot of it at the library. And of course, I'd been to Greece, so I had researched a lot of the sites and things, everything I could when I was there. The trip to Egypt was offered to me after the book was already published. So I had to do tons of research about that. By that time, I had access to Google. You could find lots and lots of stuff on Google, but I also had a lot of books at home about things like that. So it's when you're writing something like that, there's just so many things you have to, little details that you have to find out about. So that's one of the reasons why it took so long. But I enjoy doing the research, actually. I really like it. And the research that I did for this book, I used some of it for the book that I've just got looking for a publisher. And who knows what my next possible novel will be, the one that I'm working on. I'm working on one right now that's about Alexander's mother. And again, I've done most of the research for that. So I kept all my research notes, and I've got my books. So sometimes if there's something I need to know, I look on Google and I'll find out.
Well, I agree with the idea of Street View. Wikipedia is also very helpful. When I draft loosely, and I use references to Wikipedia and other bits of Google. But then when I finish that, I'll go back and I'll do a deeper dive into what's on the internet. That's when I turn to my husband and I say, it's time to go. And he books a trip that basically follows the footsteps of our characters. We line up libraries and museums, interviews, anything that we can get our hands on. We spent days in the British Museum, 2019, I think, yeah. And last year, a year ago in June, we had a month in England where we went to the British Intelligence Museum, the British Military Medical Museum, Bletchley Park. We went on to train museums, plane museums, ship museums. I sat in a Spitfire. That was one of my dreams come true,
Wow.
to have that. Am I missing something? I can't. We just do so much.
Norway.
Such detail.
The hotels.
Oh yeah, we stayed at St. Ermin Hotel. in London, which was a couple of blocks from the palace, and unfortunately right in the middle of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. So fortunately, we were going out of town every day while all the throng was coming in. It wasn't so bad, except at the very end, very last. No, it was her big day. We would go out of town on a train, and then when we got back to town, we'd take a cab to the hotel because we knew where we were coming back from. And the cab driver couldn't get to the hotel. He finally said, "I'm going to drop you at this tube. If you go down, you get the tube to your hotel." And it was right around the corner, so it wasn't a big deal. But the hotel itself was full of history. And one of the things that sticks out in my mind is during World War II, they had an escape plan from Buckingham Palace if they needed it. And that was, they would take the princesses, all of the royals actually, down into the tunnels around the tube stations, along the tube stations, and up and out of the St. Herman's Hotel. So, they have a historian on site, and he was really good about taking us on a tour and giving us the history of the hotel. So it's fascinating stuff like that. I love to do the research. Whatever my trip planner organizes always works out well.
Lucky.
I just want to say one more thing quickly too. I had some fictional characters in my Shadow of the Lion book, and one of them was a Persian court advisor. Now, how am I going to describe him? How is he going to come over? Well, one night I was in the bistro on Commercial Drive where I used to hang out with my friends. This guy came walking in, and I looked at him and I thought, that's got to be Dabarzani, my character. And I got talking to him, and lo and behold, he was actually from Baghdad, Babylon. And we've been friends ever since. He's an artist. But that was really an interesting way when you're researching your characters. He just appeared there.
Magic. Wow.
So, thank you. Yes, please, a round of applause. All these wonderful women authors. It's just been a treat. Janet, you have to help me a little bit with logistics now.